Nazi Germany is a great example of a totalitarian government. The Nazi Party came to be due to Germans feeling upset about the loss during World War I. As the Nazis ran for power in 1928, they only got 26% of the vote, but then the Great Depression took place. What we've learned from both the Soviet Union and Fascist Italy is that people will vote for anyone if they are desperate. In 1930, the Nazis were able to become the second largest party in Germany by getting 18.3% of the vote. Adolf Hitler, who was the leader of the Nazi Party, attempted a coup against the German government but failed. While in jail, Hitler was able to write his manifesto on how not just Germany, but the world should be run. This eventually made him very popular within Germany. He became popular enough to become elected as the leader of Germany. Hitler believed that everyone within the government should be loyal to him. He's able to do this by creating a pyramid of power with himself at the top. With his great speaking skills and propaganda campaigns, Hitler was able to become a cult personality within Germany. The party's purpose was to enforce all of Hitler's ideologies. Hitler even purposely created political infighting just to keep himself in power. States were dissolved and replaced with federal administrative zones to maximize the federal government's power. Jews were removed from all of their jobs and the elections were permanently canceled. Hitler made it illegal for white people to procreate with anyone who was Jewish or another race. This could be punished with death. Jews were ultimately not recognized as humans, and any and all Jews that could be found by the government were sent to concentration camps. Indians were treated with the same levels of respect. Intelligence, thrift, sexual behavior, cleanliness, prostitutes, the poor, the homeless, criminals, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, social misfits, and members of the political and religious opposition were all considered non-human. Germany introduced a hunger plan that would force Russians to starve to death during Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union. Germany believed it would have killed up to 80 million people. With Hitler's plan failing, he was only able to starve to death about 70 million out of his proposed 80 million people. Teachers were forced to be loyal to Hitler, and anyone who wasn't was reported by students to the government. All textbooks had to be approved by the government, and Nazi ideology was required to be taught at schools. A lot of important classes like math and history were altered into Nazi race indoctrination courses. Women were forced to be housekeepers and child raisers and nothing else. He believed that women were too liberal and would undermine his plan, as it would be impossible to remove Christianity from Germany and Europe as a whole. Hitler made himself out to be a religious figure. It went to the point where he was comparing himself to Jesus. Soon though, Hitler began to target Christians by arresting religious figures, replacing crosses with swastikas, and Bibles with Mein Kampf. All media was regulated by the Nazi Party. All publications and broadcasts had to be favorable towards Hitler. A lot of people stopped paying attention to the news because they did not like that it was all propaganda. People even smuggled media from outside of Germany to get an understanding of what was really going on during the war. Overall, Nazi Germany was a result of desperate people in a search to solve the Great Depression. What they ended up was with the most oppressive and evil empire to ever exist. An empire that would take anyone who wasn't pure Aryan and kill them when they got the chance. Luckily, the Allies were able to save the people of Germany from the hands of lunatics. Spain under fascist control is very easily forgotten about. Between 1936 and 1939, Franco led his army into a rebellion against the nationalist government. During the rebellion, Franco was able to find success by jailing anyone who seemed to not have the same values as Franco. Regional autonomy, liberal or social democracy, free elections, socialist leanings, and women's rights were all things that could lead someone into jail. The fascists in Spain campaigned against communism. Anti-Semitism also wasn't as big in Spain as it was in Germany, Italy, and the Soviet Union, since there weren't as many Jews. The fascists believed that the best way to get rid of the few Jews that were in Spain would be by converting them to Catholicism. I'm having trouble speaking this episode. 270,000 people died from the Civil War, and 500,000 left the country to seek peace. Anyone who was caught trying to leave Spain was either jailed or sent to German concentration camps. After World War II, the fascists began to label themselves as progressives to try to prevent any Western backlash against the government. It was also because the United Nations wouldn't recognize Franco's government unless he would improve human rights within his country. Like Hitler, Franco made himself into a religious figure to gain as much support as he could. He stated that God sent him to Spain to save it from poverty and crisis. The fascists even avoided calling themselves a party, rather calling themselves a nationalist movement in an attempt to sound more grand. Franco's government was a mix between a free and demand economy, but was still heavily moderated by the government. It's kind of hard to describe the economy of fascist Spain because they did not like communism or capitalism, but supported competition to help keep the economy growing without needing to get involved in foreign trade. Communism and trade unions were made illegal. College students attempted to start an anti-Franco revolution, but it was suppressed by Franco's army. Franco banned all cultural traditions and replaced them with the government traditions that felt more Spanish. All media was suppressed by the government so that the only pro-government narratives would get published. The economy was in rough shape, and due to pressure from both internal sources and the United States, Spain was forced to liberalize its economy. Afterwards, the economy began to boom as foreign investment began to flow into the country. By the time Franco died, Spain was one of the fastest growing economies in the world due to its liberalization. Spain is an interesting story on how totalitarianism only works for so long. At the beginning, people feel freed from the struggles they had before, but as oppression is implemented by the government, the country stops developing. And only by creating freedom and opening markets will the country be able to grow again. North Korea is normally the first thought that comes to mind when discussing totalitarianism. In 1910, Japan annexed the Korean Empire, which was ruled by a king. As Japan occupied Korea, they invested a lot of money into manufacturing to benefit off of the people they conquered. This resulted in the northern half of Korea being more advanced in manufacturing while the south is more agricultural. Korea, being a Japanese territory, did not have much contact with the Western world. But one thing from the Western world was able to make its way into Korea. That one thing would be Christianity. With the Koreans not liking that they were being ruled by Japan, came separatist movements. This involved rebellions by many revolutionaries, the most famous being a man named Kim Il-sung. After World War II, Japan was forced to give up its Korean territories. This land was then divided along the 38th parallel. The northern half was controlled by the Soviet Union, while the southern half was ruled by the United States. In 1948, Kim Il-sung was appointed by the Soviet Union to be the communist leader of North Korea. In 1950, Kim Il-sung convinced the leader of the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin, to help them into invading and taking over South Korea. This was an attempt by the North to unify the two nations, while an attempt by the Soviet Union to spread communism. After the war, not much changed. At one point, the North was on the brink of victory until the United Nations and the United States joined in, and then the South is on the brink of victory until China joined in. In the end, the border was just a bit farther north than where it was before. While the Soviet Union was in the process of removing policy from the Stalin era, Sung thought that was a terrible idea, and in response, he implemented Stalinism into his own nation. Early on, North Korea's economy was stronger than the South's due to the industry implemented by the Japanese during World War II. But by the 1960s, Korea still had the highest GDP per capita, but GDP per capita was growing significantly faster in the South. By the 1970s, South Korea caught up to North Korea. In the 1980s, North Korea's economy began to stagnate due to most of its imports and exports being to and from the Soviet Union, who was in the process of trying to rip itself apart. And when the Soviet Union officially ripped itself apart by the 1990s, the North Korean economy collapsed. As Kim Il-sung died in 1994 due to a heart attack, his son, Kim Jong-il, became the new leader of North Korea. Floods and famine were the result of over 400,000 deaths in North Korea. In one of the only times in history, Korea opened up and accepted humanitarian aid from the United Nations. The United States was also becoming more friendly with North Korea. That all changed when President George Bush of the United States began to label North Korea as a member of the Axis of Evil. In response, North Korea developed its first nuclear weapon. These weapons were developed to deter the United States from invading, which at the time it was not uncommon for the United States to invade a country if they did not like the leadership of said country. In 2011, when Kim Jong-il died from a heart attack, his son, Kim Jong-un, became the leader of North Korea. For his entire reign as dictator, he has been threatening to go to war with both South Korea and the United States if they conducted any form of attack on them. In 2023, Kim Jong-un labeled South Korea as a vassal state of North Korea. As it would be nice to explain the politics of North Korea, it is best to just rewatch this section where I talk about the Soviet Union. The only difference there is with North Korea is that they're a lot more strict with their policy than the Soviet Union was. In Korea, people wanted freedom. In the South, they were given a dictatorship that slowly evolved into a democracy, while at the same time developing one of the most advanced economies in the world. On the other hand, North Korea was given a dictatorship who never let go of their grip of power. Instead of forming a democracy, the Kim family adopted Stalinism, and with each generation the practice of politics became more and more harsh. Before and during the Second World War, China was going through a civil war. After World War II, the general of the communist revolutions, Mao Zedong, led the communists to victory. On October 1st, 1949, the Communist Party formed the People's Republic of China. Between 1949 and 1959, China's economy grew due to the end of both the Civil War and World War II. China was able to make the economy grow by taking over farms and forcing criminals to work in labor camps. In the 1950s, the Chinese government adopted a similar economic plan as the Soviet Union. During the Korean War, China helped North Korea in their efforts to take over South Korea. On October 16, 1964, China successfully tested their first nuclear bomb. Stalin believed that the Chinese Communist Party wasn't even communist, but just a group of Chinese nationalists. Stalin didn't even recognize Mao Zedong as the leader of China. But eventually, the two nations agreed to a friendship alliance. The Soviet Union ended up investing a lot of money into Chinese industry and Chinese education. In 1956, the Communist Party declared China to be a socialist nation. It also became illegal to criticize the party. The punishments would go from jail time to forced labor. China was against de-Stalinization within the Soviet Union. They stated that Stalin was a good person. I want you to replay that again to get a good understanding of how China thinks of treating its people. While the Soviet Union wanted to spread communism peacefully, China wanted to spread communism through war. China stated that they did not want Soviet troops stationed within their country during peacetime because of China's history of being colonized. With China's population booming, their economy could not keep up. To combat this, China wanted to set a goal of producing more steel than Great Britain. To do this, China would conduct the Great Leap Forward, a program where people would give all of their steel that they had to the government so that it could be exported for money and reused to build industry. But this ended in farmers giving up all their tools, which then resulted in a famine. 20 to 40 million people ended up dying due to the Great Leap Forward. After this, the Soviet Union stopped exporting technology and sciences to China. The Soviet Union soon after pulled out of the industry investments. This resulted in the slowing of industrialization within China. During the Cultural Revolution, Mao wrote a Little Red Book. This book was about Mao's political and economic ideologies. It was required for all schools to teach the Little Red Book. After Mao's death, China began to open up to the world and liberalize. This resulted in China's economy to boom. Today, China is ruled by Xi Jinping. While under his rule, China for a period of time was outperforming America's economy. But Xi started to re-implement more totalitarian and controlling laws over time. This resulted in the United States starting a trade war with China and scaring Western investors from putting money into China. This has resulted in China's economy slowing to almost a halt. We can learn that even though China doesn't really know what is going on economically, it is a totalitarian state who criminalizes people who speak against the government. Afghanistan is an interesting example. Afghanistan is ruled by the Taliban, which is a Muslim extremist terrorist organization. The Taliban is responsible for the attacks on 9/11. The Taliban follows Sharia law, which categorizes women as property and sees anyone that is not Muslim as an enemy that needs to be eliminated. In Afghanistan, women are not allowed to show their faces except for their eyes, their hair, and their ankles. If they do, they could face the punishment of being stoned to death in public. ISIS is very similar to the Taliban. ISIS is a Muslim extremist terrorist organization stationed between Iran and Israel. Although they don't control any government, they do have a very active militia within the Middle East. They follow Sharia law as well. Overall, we can learn some very important things about how totalitarian governments came to be. With an economic or political crisis, people tend to vote for anyone who promises that they will fix said problem. They will let the government take away their political freedoms for a false sense of protection. They will even adopt counterproductive cultures to fit the demands of their government. But instead of getting reform, people are forced to live in oppression. The rights of specific people are taken away to fit an agenda. The economy surges short-term, but collapses due to an oblivious government not understanding supply and demand. And when people ask for change, they get met with an iron fist. The only way to seek freedom again is by death and revolution. But with revolution, how will people know that they aren't installing another oppressive government? The best way to prevent oppressive governments is by creating legal checks on the government. This is what made the United States government so great during its founding. But over time, people who don't pay attention to politics or don't understand the founding fathers elect people who don't believe in being righteous but believe in gaining power. Over the years, the government has gotten bigger and bigger, while people have less and less privacy. With more and more confusing laws, it's getting easier for people that don't like you to accuse you of a niche crime that nobody knows existed. Today, the government pressures social media companies to censor topics that make the government look bad. To prevent the United States from becoming a totalitarian nation itself, we need to do more to research into who we vote for. We need to vote for people who are willing to limit their own power for the sake of the safety of the people. At the end of the day, the state of the nation is all up to you, the individual. I want to thank you for watching this episode. If you think I got something wrong, let me know in the comments. If you want me to look into a specific topic, also let me know in the comments. Subscribe if you enjoy this kind of long-form content. Subscribe to my Clips channel if you prefer to watch shorter segmented forms of this podcast. And finally, subscribe to my Shorts channel if you only want to hear my most informative quotes. Links to all my channels are in the description. Links to all my sources are also in the description. The next podcast will be about the book The Storm of Steel by Ernest Junger, so stay tuned for that. Anyways, I'll see you next time.